so much, Dr. Nader, for this excellent talk. And I want to just say, you could have talked for much longer. And I think it'd be nice for you to know that I actually teach the entire university course exactly on this topic called Quantum Theory, Eastern Cosmology, and Consciousness. And I would like to, in the way that Gopi did as well, I'm going to just observe 3 points that I think you excellently stated in my own language. I published a paper in the Journal of Cosmology that looks at the Upanishads and looks at the Upanishads and the connection between quantum mechanics and quantum principles of the Upanishads. And in many ways, it's going to affirm what you wonderfully stated. And I'll put the link actually to this free article in the chat for everyone to have access to. And it really is this. With regard to quantum theory, I propose that the teachings of the Upanishads can be summarized into centering around 3 key points. Number 1, there exists a transcendental, infinite, non-local, dimensionless, unchanging reality that is obscured from the limited cognitive perception of the human senses. Number 2, this foundational reality is veiled by means of a cognitive illusion that limits consciousness into a localized, linear, and dimensionally finite perception of space and time. Number 3, advanced mental trainings were developed and practiced in order to liberate one's consciousness from the illusory cognitive limitations of the mind via a perceptual reframing of space and time into its fundamental non-local entangled state. And so why I'm stating these 3 observations that I published in this article is that it's I think it's wonderful, I think, for our audience to know that many of the pioneers in quantum mechanics, Schrödinger, Bohr, etc., when they were formulating their theories around quantum mechanics, like the quantum field, the collapse of the wave function, they were going into the Upanishads and using analogies and passages from the Upanishads in their written correspondences. So the quantum field is Brahman. The idea of cognitive filtration is Maya. The idea of Atman and Brahman is complementarity. And so it's wonderful to see that quantum mechanics, which is probably the most remarkable advancement in the sciences in probably the past, in physics at least, the past 100 years, solidly has a grounding in Vedic philosophy and teachings. The one question I have for you, I'm gonna keep it short, we have Q&A. We both have a fascination in neuroscience and the brain and consciousness. I like to think, and maybe you can agree with me, do you believe that when we talk about consciousness in the Western perspective, it's really conscious with a small c? And when we talk about consciousness from the Vedic perspective, it's the capital C. And so I think we need to be very aware that when we're talking about consciousness, there's a confusion in the Western scientific mind, and I think you can probably speak to this, that looks at consciousness through this small c term. So one question I have is, as someone with brain science expertise that you have as well, do you think that there are neural processes in the brain that limit or in some way obscure this or veil this dimensional state? And do you think that if the human brain or psyche were to have this full access, would it be too overwhelming for the human brain to process? Do you think our nervous system would go into overload? Do you think that it would be able to even handle getting a glimpse in the same way that Arjuna got a glimpse of Krishna in his divine form? It overwhelmed him. Do you think that would be the same case for us?
If we are not prepared, of course, it can be overwhelming. There is no question. And that's why evolution happens in a soft way. By the way, congratulations on the paper. This is really wonderful. The points you brought up are just right on the money, as they say in the West. And it's really beautiful. Yes, evolution has to happen in a sequential way, and ultimately Arjuna gets enlightened. He gets smriti labdha, he remembers, his memory comes back, but he had to go through the process. And Arjuna was already very enlightened, and even him, he had to go through this process, and he couldn't fathom the absolute infinite possibilities that are within the absolute and manifest pure being that Krishna showed him, in this amazing chapter where he opens his mouth and the whole thing appears. And that is the field of the divine possibilities that are there in the absolute field of pure being. And as you say beautifully, individuals have access to a limited awareness. As we grow, we get higher states of consciousness, ultimately reaching unity consciousness, where we can understand the true value of Aham Brahmasmi on an experiential level, Vedoham on an experiential level, not just on an intellectual analysis level. But that is a process, and the process requires corrections in the nervous system structure and mode of functioning. I call them the patterns, networks, and modes of functioning of the complex consciousness as it manifests through the nervous system.